With it, let us know when we are live on YouTube. We'll start.
Yeah, we are live now.
भारती मैम और सर ने ज्वाइन कर लिया है.
We are waiting for director sir. We are waiting for director sir.
I guess the participants limit is 101 and no more can join.
We are adding a YouTube link.
Yeah.
Compact team, we can start the event now.
Start.
Do not save what is left after spending. Instead, spend what is left after saving. Warren Buffett. A budget tells your money where to go instead of wondering where it went. More money cannot help if you have a bad spending habit because a small leak is all it takes to sink a great ship. A very good warm evening to one and all present over here. On behalf of MAIMS, the Compact Commerce Society of Maharaja Agha Sen Institute of Management Studies, I would like to welcome our guest speaker for today, Mr. Subhash Chandra Garg, sir, our faculty members, and the audience to this interactive session. I would also like to extend my gratitude to our director, sir, Professor Dr. Ravi Kumar Gupta, and welcome him to say a few words.
Kashish sir has not joined yet. So you can ask Sumedha ma'am, you can request her to say a few words.
Okay. I would also like to extend my gratitude to Dr. Sumedha Datta ma'am, Associate Professor, Department of Business Administration and President of MAX, and welcome her to say a few words.
Thank you. I think Director Sir is caught up in some professional commitment, so he would be joining us shortly. A very good evening to all dignitaries and participants of the day. A warm welcome to a resource person, Mr. Subhash Chandra Garg, who has served in various prestigious positions. And sir, it is indeed a privilege to have such a distinguished resource person with us. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, sir, definitely. And I would also like to acknowledge and appreciate the persistent efforts of the team Compact. So as the head of the Cultural Society, it is my privilege to talk about Compact, a team that has been working rigorously. And believe me, sir, for the past so many years, you would be amazed by their growth chart. The year 2022 has just begun, and this is the third webinar that is being organized by Compact. And for the present webinar, I have been informed that the registration number has crossed 400. So congratulations to the team. You have a regular newsletter that is always a source source of great amount of information for me. Thank you for organizing such enlightening sessions one after the other. I also acknowledge the faculty coordinators, Dr. Bharti Chaudhary and Dr. Ekta Dargan, for their valuable guidance. I wish the team all the best for this grand session. Once again, thank you, Mr. Subhash Chandra Garg, for sparing your valuable time for our enthusiastic participants. And I'm sure that our participants will learn a lot from your rich practical experience. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Now, I would like to hand over the stage to Suhani to start the event by welcoming our speaker.
Good evening to one and all present here. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce our speaker for today, who is going to dispel some haze around the budget 2022-23. Our speaker, Mr. Subhash Chandra Garg, sir, is a 1983 batch IAS officer of the Rajasthan cadre. Mr. Garg is a qualified cost and management accountant as well as a company secretary. He has served as both Economic Affairs Secretary and Finance Secretary of India. He has also served as an executive director in the World Bank. He was in charge of the power sector's policy management. Sir has worked for the Union government as well as the Government of Rajasthan in a number of key positions. He has also served as a principal consultant for the National Institute of Public Finance and Policy on deputation under Rule 6, subsection 2 of the Indian Administrative Service Cadre Rules, 1954. Thank you, sir, for joining us today. We are honored to have you as our guest for the webinar. Sir, you may take over from now.
Thank you very much, and a very nice good evening to you all, members from the faculty as well as the students. It's really nice to hear that there's been so much of interest, over 400 participants, and I see on the text that you have a limitation of 100 on the on this webinar, and the rest are joining on YouTube. So it's really great, and that shows to my mind the spirit of inquiry which is there in the young minds, and the kind of interest which they are taking now in the budgets and many of the national policy and other issues which take place. So I'm really very, very happy to be here. Now, today we are doing a kind of charcha on budget. The budget was presented only 2 days back, and I'm assuming that all of you listened to the finance minister's speech and also followed up later. Some of you might have looked at the budget documents. I don't know, it might be early for you to sort of go into the budget documents, but some of you might have definitely had some keen sense to look what exactly. Budget speech is not the budget. Budget speech is only highlights of the government's achievements as well as major policy initiatives, and also the large, big numbers of the budget. The budget actually is in 14 odd statements and the documents which the government put out along with the budget speech. The budget, as was being said in the beginning, is actually balancing the books of any entity, in this case the Government of India. You have certain expenditure commitments, and you raise taxes and other revenue resources for meeting it. And the balance which you can't meet from your tax revenues and the other revenues, you raise it by way of borrowings in the market elsewhere. So essentially the budget is a three-phenomenon document: the expenditure program, the revenues, and the borrowings. This arithmetic is the one which gets captured in what is known as annual financial statement, which, as per the constitutional requirement, is required to be placed in the parliament. And once the government places these statement and other budget documents, there are two other major approvals which the parliament accords before the budget becomes authorized spending power of the government. One as appropriation bill. So I don't know whether I should go into these kind of things, but just to introduce you, government's entire financial resources remain in two accounts, which the Constitution permits. One is known as Consolidated Fund of India, and the other one is known as public account. Right? All government borrowings, revenues, and expenditure undertake through the Consolidated Fund. You might view it like your own bank account, so to say. It's the government's bank account kept with the Reserve Bank. And so that is where the government's own tax revenue, other revenues, expenditure, loans, etc. come in. Then there is a public account in which the government receives lots of public's deposits and the public receipts, etc. For example, small savings, which actually belong to the people, or for that matter, provident funds, etc. These belong to the people, not to the government. So these are received in the public account, and transactions undertake there. The government does get the cash balance of the public account to be used for its purposes, because that cash balance otherwise would remain unutilized, and that becomes a sort of source of borrowing for the government. Now, when you make budget, you look at what your expenditure priorities and commitments are. Primarily, the government's expenditures are on three broad subjects, three broad themes. One, as you being the economics and the commerce students understand, the government is primarily designed to undertake what is known as public goods and services. So you do defense, you do law and order, you do environmental management and other things which are only being the common goods, can only be undertaken by the government, right? So that's one set of expenditures which is very large. For example, defense requirements or paramilitary forces, which the government employ to maintain the order and the internal security in the country. So that's one set of expenditure, right? The second set of expenditure is what the government does for sort of promoting growth and the jobs creation in the economy. So whether it's in the agriculture sector, where you undertake numerous programs, for example, let us say using the high quality seeds, or what was known as Green Revolution, or you want to promote milk economy in the country, or you want to promote the fish economy in the country. So all those kind of expenditures through subsidizing food or subsidizing seed or fertilizer, or even bank interest, and that kind of things takes place through the budget mechanism. Likewise, in the industry, you must have heard about the PLI, this productivity linked incentive scheme, or there are many other programs which are undertaken for the MSMEs and others, right? So these are, and for the labor, you undertake some programs. You promote their pension scheme, or you promote their long-term savings, or undertake some other programs to provide support to the labor. So that is, or for the financial sector, you do something. So these are the second kind of expenditures which in a way support the growth and the jobs in the economy. The third kind of expenditures are primarily what we call redistribution expenditure. There are large sections of society in the economy which either on their own are not in a position to support the people who are handicapped, old aged, single women, and there are many other of that category. They are supported by the government by providing cash support or free grains or some other kind of support. So that's one segment. Then you also have, let's say, in the health sector, in the education sector, you need to provide education support, the health support through education programs and other kind of things. So some of these support are delivered in kind. Some of these are delivered in the form of food grains, etc. Some of these are delivered in the form of cash. Some of these support programs are also given like under programs like NREGA, where the government said that you can come and do 100 days employment in case you're not able to get a more productive employment somewhere else. So these are social security measures for, so these are the three broad buckets of the expenditure. The government does a lot of estimation. And in addition, for the promoting growth of the economy, the government also undertakes a lot of capex. The capital expenditure in infrastructure, the capital expenditure in supporting public sector, capital expenditure in supporting manufacturing, as I said about PLI and things like that. So these are the three broad kind of expenditures. You organize them as revenue expenditures or capital expenditure, depending upon for how long you will get the benefit of that investment or expenditure, right? So very carefully after these expenditures, which are undertaken in several ministries and departments and organizations of the government. So in the run-up to the budget, with very close discussions, you estimate the expenditure requirements. On the revenue side, just to introduce you, there are basically three kinds of revenues. One is what we know as tax revenues. So in tax revenue, and then again you have different kind of taxes. You have corporate taxes, you have personal income taxes, you have customs duty, you have excise duty, and now you have a whole lot of GST related revenues which also come in. So on the tax side, these are estimated, the policy decisions taken about what kind of changes we need to bring on the tax laws. And the second kind of revenues is what we call as non-tax revenues. So non-tax revenues come in the form of dividends and profits from the public sector entities, surplus of the RBI, and that kind of stuff. And finally, we have the capital receipts from disinvestment program. So the government undertakes minority share sale, it undertakes the privatization of the undertakings. So after doing all these arithmetic on the revenue side and the expenditure side, then you finally come up with the balancing number, that what is my balance left uncovered, and then you decide how to borrow, and then you also take decisions about whether you borrow from the market or you raise in the form of small savings, or you undertake some other ways. So I think this big exercise which is undertaken in the budget making generally remains little bit in wraps in the background, and most attention in the budget day is acquired by what the finance minister says in the budget speech and some of those top items. I described this to really suggest to you that in case you have real, genuine, major interest in understanding the budgets of the countries and what goes in and what doesn't go into it, all this, I would strongly suggest to you that you get hold of the budget documents and especially look at the two documents. One is called expenditure profile. It's available online now, and now the government provides this in the form of an application. So you can download that app, and the expenditure profile is available. a very detailed analysis is presented of different kinds of expenditures which the government incur. Then the other document which I would recommend you to read and go through is called receipts document, receipt budget, which gives all the receipts as well as all the borrowings. Now, having given this initial sort of introduction about what kind of budget is made and where the key information about the budget would be available, let me now come to the budget which was presented 2 days back. Those of you who would have heard the budget speech, the principal pivot or the USP of this year's budget was a large capital expenditure program, which the finance minister announced. The finance minister said that we had 5.5 lakh crore of the expenditure budgeted in the current year, which is 21-22, and we are raising it by as much as 34% to 7.5 lakh crores for next year. And she said the private investment in the economy is not sort of forthcoming these days, and to sort of crowd in and leverage the private investment, it's necessary to increase the public expenditure, and that is why she was proposing to increase this much public expenditure from the government side. So that was the principal program announced by the finance minister. A lot of government expenditure is in a way structurally inflexible. I'll just give you 2 major examples to you. One, lot of expenditure goes into sort of subsidizing food. So we have a food subsidy, we have fertilizer subsidy, which also goes into the food economy. And in this budget, if you would look at it, there's about 4 to 5 lakh crore of funds which have gone into the subsidies, right? There was a lot of expectation that the government would do something for the unemployed, something for creating jobs, and something to support demand and the consumption in the economy. The government undertakes quite a few programs for doing it. The biggest one is what is known as NREGA. As I mentioned earlier, you get about 100 days of employment. Last 2 years, we had faced a situation of COVID, which had, especially in the contact intensive services, created a lot of joblessness, job losses, and the wage losses, which is reflected in the increased demand for the NREGA work. Typically, every year, about 7 crore Indians out of the labor force of about 45 crore want NREGA work. But in 2021, when the COVID was at its peak, about 12 crore to 13 crore workers wanted work in the NREGA, right? And the NREGA expenditures went up from about 70,000 crores to about 1.2 lakh crore. This year also, there has been increased demand, about 9 to 9.5 or 9 to 9.5 crore people wanted NREGA work, right? And the government's expenditure this year also is exceeded. But the government has provided much lesser allocation for the next year. That's about 73,000 crores. And there has been a lot of criticism that the government has not provided the NREGA support enough allocations. But that perhaps is not very correct, because the government can always, during the year, in case there is a increased demand, we are expected to go into a situation where possibly the COVID-related disruptions may not be as large in the year 22-23, as it has been in the past 2 years, and therefore it shouldn't be. The other major change which the government seems to have indicated is that, you remember this free ration, this 5 kg per person, which was initially started for only about 7-8 months last year, has been continued until 31st March 2022. But if you go by the allocations which have been made for food subsidy for the next year, it appears that the government intends to discontinue this food subsidy, this free ration from 1st of April. So they have provided very small amount of allocations for that. Now, that is what is on the expenditure side. There's a lot of discussion about the revenue being quite buoyant in the current year, which is reflected in the increased expected revenue, about 3 lakh crores over a base of 16 lakh crores. That's quite a decent increase. There's been also a lot of reporting about corporate income tax rising very much this year. And it's all true that the corporate tax income this year has been phenomenally good. But I would just remind you that the corporate tax this year at about 6.5 lakh crore is still less than the corporate tax revenues in 18-19. So because in between we had a lot of corporate tax cuts, and the economy had gone down into a very lower growth phase. You must have all heard that in last year we had actually negative growth of 7.3%, which has now been revised to 6.6%. And this year's growth of about 9%, taking together still in 2 years, we are more or less at the level of 1920. Our consumption has still not grown. The private consumption by people, you and me, who spend on meeting our consumption requirement, still is lesser than the 1920. So economy is facing a lot of situation, but in times to come, next year it is expected that we should be getting into normal. Government's growth rate for the next year is about 8 to 8.5%. So this is all which goes into the budget making. There's been criticism after there's been a lot of praise for what the government did in expanding the capex expenditure, but there's also been a lot of criticism of not expanding the poverty and the employment related allocations. That is where the budget is. Let me spend some time before I stop for you to raise questions. And I would do it at 7:05 so that we have about 20-25 minutes of the discussion. And I think that's what the best part in my judgment is. Let me touch 2 or 3 more subjects before we come in. Budget is also a major instrument of economic policy announcements, besides the expenditures and the fiscal policy or fiscal numbers, right? A key economic policy reform program of the government is the privatization of the public sector, or the disinvestment program, what we call. For last 2 years, the government has been budgeting ambitiously for the disinvestment program. It had also announced mega divestment program. 2 banks were supposed to be sold. 1 insurance company was also to be privatized. Then several companies like BPCL, Concor, and others were also to be sold off. Unfortunately, the government has succeeded only in privatizing the Air India. And that also has come at a very big cost. The government got 2,700 crores for the entire Air India, But government's equity in Air India was about 55,000 crores. So for 50,000 crores of equity, you're getting about 2,700 crores. And you also had to take over about 85,000 to 90,000 crores of loans. So it's good because once it is privatized, its annual losses of about 8 to 10,000 crores will not be coming to the governments any longer, but it has come as at a very large cost to that. But none of the other privatization program has moved. The Bank Nationalization Act was required to be amended for undertaking or initiating the privatization of 2 banks. The government didn't undertake that. And so likewise, BPCL, there are issues connected with the product pricing. If you don't allow completely free pricing of petroleum products, diesel and petrol, no one will buy them. So like what you see in last 75 to 80 days, there's been no adjustment of the petroleum products pricing, maybe because of elections or whatever. But all this makes the private investors nervous about joining or taking over these kind of companies. So privatization agenda of the government seems to have suffered quite a big jolt. And there is now talk of only LIC 5% or 10% disinvestment. That's not privatization. And the issues connected with LIC, let's wait for the documents to come up, how it comes. But a major development in last few months, if not so, is the setback on the privatization front. The other, which might have interested you, was the last year's announcement by the government to undertake a major monetization exercise. Right. So the government wanted it announced a national monetization pipeline where it said we'll raise about 6 lakh crores by monetizing the assets of public sectors. There is a difference between privatization and monetization. Privatization, you sell off the company completely, the ownership gets completely transferred. The government has nothing to do with that entity thereafter. But in monetization, the government continues to be the owner of that principal asset. But it gives out for some time, 10 years, 15 years, 20, 40, 50, whatever, for use and maintenance of that asset, and to earn by way of toll or other income for that. And after that concession period is over, that asset in that form reverts to the government. So there is a basic difference. Here the key is to create the transaction of monetization. The government undertook 2 transactions, one from the power grid, when some of these power grids were sold off or monetized in the form of InvIT. I hope you have heard about these InvITs and REITs kind of thing. I'm not going into it. And then the NHAI also undertook an InvIT program for some of the roads. But it was not anywhere close to 80,000 crores which the government wanted to raise by way of monetization this year. And the total accruals has been only in the range of about 13 to 14,000 crores. So the program has also suffered a kind of setback. The government had also announced, if you would remember last year, that it will set up a bad bank to take over the non-performing loans of the public sector banks. And it also announced to set up a national infrastructure financing bank, so to say NAFID, which will provide the infrastructure financing. These initiatives, a lot of work has been done to make them operationalize, but still at the end of 1 year, a lot of work is still left to be done. And there's not been a single non-performing loan which has been taken over by the entity NARCL, which has been set up for this purpose. And the bad bank is also still to take over any of the non-performing. These are the initiatives which take time to fully fructify, but at the same time you have to chase with complete conviction and very hard follow-up to make that these initiatives don't slip into inaction, kind of thing. So I think I would stop at this moment and would suggest to you to raise whatever questions you have in your mind, and let us generate discussion on that. Feel free, don't be shy of whatever is sort of troubling your mind, to raise questions, and let's have an interaction. Thank you.
Sir, actually, we have taken question already in the Google Sheet from the participants. If you want, we.
Hello. Is it problem at my end or?
Sir, have their question in the feeds. Sorry, sir. I think my net got lost. Am I audible?
Yes, now you're audible, Utkarsh.
I'm sorry, there was some network issue. Priyanshi, have we got the questions from the
Yes,
Google?
thank you for such an insightful session, sir. Now I would like to ask a few questions which we have got from the audience.
I saw somebody raising hand also, so I don't mind if the impromptu questions are also permitted. But go ahead with your questions first.
Thank you, sir. So the question is there any specific reason why the government decided to take conservative tax and expenditure figures?
So there is some commentary that the government has sort of estimated the tax revenues for the next year conservatively. Right. My assessment is that the current year's tax assessment, which is about 3 lakh crores, as I mentioned earlier, over a base of 16 lakh crores, is quite reasonable. The government can't afford to overestimate. It's better to do a little bit of underestimation if necessary, rather than overestimating, because then everyone keeps on nagging the government that you are not able to achieve your targets and things like that. The next year's increase of about 11% of the tax increases is what a lot of people say that is underestimation. But please remember, there's a lot of changes taking place right now in the economy works. This year's profits of corporates essentially were also influenced by a couple of factors. There was a mass global demand, and the commodity super cycle you witnessed because of that raised the profits of mineral companies and metals companies and many other companies in cement, steel kind of sectors. And but that commodity super cycle and the export generated demand is now plateauing. There is increasing evidence. If you look at the numbers of the third quarter results of many companies which have come up, including even the cement steel companies, there is now no longer that kind of growth which was witnessed. In fact, some of the companies are reporting lower profits than last year. So I think it's better to be a little conservative. It doesn't hurt to keep, but in my estimates, the revenue estimates are reasonable, not conservative. On the expenditure side, the basic criticism has come for lower NREGA allocations, lower food subsidy allocations, and the lower fertilizer subsidy allocations. I think these are the three items which have been pointed out by people. I touched upon this when I was initially making my initial comments. These are so NREGA expenditure will depend upon the demand of laborers for work. If the economy improves and gets into a normal growth path, the demand for NREGA work can actually come down to a more normal level. And what the government has provided is for a normal year, not for a abnormal year. So in retrospect, maybe a year later, if there is a shock or the COVID situation, I don't wish anything like that to happen. But if we have another severe variant or wave or something which disturbs the functioning of the economy and the jobs, only in that event probably we will have a situation of under provided provisions, right? But again, if that happens, and as I said, we don't want anything like that to happen, there is always possibility of government raising those in the revised estimates. So I don't think you should worry too much about any possible underestimation or expenditures.
Thank you, sir. The next question is, was the budget 2021 so well that only few minor changes were done in budget 2022?
Yeah, this is, I think, more serious comment. I have written something in my papers. You can see that this budget was virtually conspicuous by the absence of any major policy announcements. There was hardly anything, and the kind of paragraphs which are there in the budget speech were mostly touching upon very small issues. Just to give you an example, if you look at last 5 years budget on agriculture, we may agree or disagree about the kind of policies which were adopted, but there were lots of policy measures on agriculture, right? Likewise, lots of policy issues in financial sector. But this year, there is hardly anything in the agriculture except some routine announcements that we'll create some digital arrangement for collecting data from for the agriculture, or we'll have something with drone-based collection of data. These are not really major initiatives. So I do agree that the budget speech particularly was little lackluster, if I may put it. There was one major announcement only about this capex, which hawked the highlight. So, but in a way, this led to a shorter budget speech this year. But I would have been happier if the budget speech, being short, maybe still shorter than this, would have contained much more meaningful and high impact kind of announcement rather than the lower announcements, lower impact announcements.
Oh, so
Thank you, sir. The next question.
Priyanshu, just a minute, sir. We are getting a question many times about the 30% tax on visual currency. Yeah. So as we are millennials and Gen Z, so we invest in cryptos. So the audience wants to know that what is it like the 30% tax? Can you please elaborate?
I'd expected this question to come, and I didn't sort of cover this. So let me explain what has been done. So until now, the gains on trading of crypto assets were taxable. These were not free, but the taxation system did not specifically recognize these gains and these assets, right? Which has led to two kind of situations, right? One, for the investor were not clear what is the taxation system for the crypto assets gains. Some thought it's tax-free, so they would not report. Some thought it's equivalent to equities or something, so they reported that kind of income and paid that kind of tax. Some treated this as a regular capital income, capital gains income for non-financial sector. So there was a lot of unclarity for the investors. For the taxation authorities also, there was similar dilemma or trilemma, whatever way you put it. They also didn't know where to assess them. should it be assessed as business income, or should it be assessed equivalent to a stock or bonds sales, or things like that? So this confusion, or the state of confusion, has been very well sort of dispelled or taken care by the government announcing that the crypto assets related capital gains, whether they are short term or long term, would be, in fact, it doesn't define what is short term for long term. It does not, because every gain is similarly taxed at 30%. So at 30% of the income would be required to be paid for this one. This brings clarity, but there is a lot of resentment that this is a very high rate of tax, right? If you treat long-term capital gains on equities at 10% or short-term at 15%, and you allow indexation also, but for cryptos you don't allow even any cost other than the main cost of acquisition to be set off, then it's a very high rate of taxation. So there is a resentment. But I would suggest that one should take this as the initial gambit of the government, that yes, you have now a clarity that the crypto gains are taxable at 30%. If it is harsh or unfair, let us now get into a dialogue with the government and try to bring in a more reasonable regime. There is one more provision which I think is more sort of troublesome in the actual context of the working in the crypto system, and that is 1% TDS, which any buyer of the cryptocurrency or crypto assets would have to make before it makes payment to any other resident seller. And there is then some sort of inequity. If you buy a crypto asset from a foreign seller, you're not supposed to deduct 1%. If you buy it from a resident seller, then you're supposed to deduct 1%. And deducting 1% is not an easy thing procedurally. You will have to register with the department, take a certificate or permission for being a tax deduction authority, and then you deduct that, and then you deposit that with the income tax department and all. So this will create enormous amount of procedural hassles for the investors. So my take on this provision is that in the short term, this is likely to dissuade and discourage many of the crypto investors from staying on or getting into this business. But hopefully, if the industry is able to convince the government to create a more favorable or more reasonable tax regime, perhaps the interest might come. But in the short term, I tweeted it on that day. I said, this is the party is over for the crypto investors for the time being.
Priyanshi, you can carry on with the question.
Yes, the next question is, why was there no mention of inflation in the budget?
See, as I said earlier, lots of economic phenomenon which normally find mention in the budget, whether it's growth or inflation or macroeconomic stability or imports, exports. More this time they were missing, and inflation, especially being such a hot topic today, should have found mention in the. And government should have come out with its strategy of how the government intends to deal with the inflation. But if you look at the underlying structure of budget, you would see the government's strategy to deal with inflation, right? And this is not only evident in this budget, this was evident in last two budgets also. The government has been reluctant to expand the stimulus or the cash giveaways, which has been done in many developed countries. Was the government aware of the supply side disruption? Thought that in case there is a demand side push as well, the inflation would go out of hand, right? This India had seen in 2008, 9, 9, 10 also, when the inflation reached to about 12, 13, 14% levels, right? So government deliberately did not expand the demand side measures to deal with the inflation. Supply side inflation, which is also reflected in the divergence between the wholesale index and the retail index, retail inflation index, is also probably worrying the government, because the wholesale prices tend to feed into retail sometime later, right? So there is a real danger of inflation getting a little out of hand in the next year. But without saying much, I think by containing the fiscal expenditures, not expanding the direct support program, which is not necessarily a good thing, because people who need that support still need it, right? And they can't remain deprived and become more poor without the support in such kind of dire situations. But on the whole, from the macroeconomic perspective, so there is an underlying inflation strategy, but this was not said. Possibly one reason is that if you say these things, that we are not expanding the direct support programs for the consumers because we are worried about inflation, then you're going to get a backlash, right? So perhaps the discretion is better part of the valor. You do it, but you don't talk about it.
Sir, RBI. Yes, sir. Actually, we have taken all the question in the Google form from the audience, and we are asking them.
Well, I still see some people raising hands.
Yes, sir. We have already shared the form links with them. They have wrote down there.
Right.
Yes, sir. So RBI has decided to launch its own digital currency. So does it mean that India is also
Utkarsh, your audio seems to be...
Sir, Utkarsh, I guess your network error is at your end. Sir, he's basically asking that RBI has launched a new currency, like cryptocurrency, and so it means that Indian government is legalizing the crypto.
No. This is not at all correct understanding. The cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin came from the private space, right? It was not on the official side. And they offered a solution, in fact, trying to run down the central bank currency, because this is trust-based, there are a lot of other issues connected with it. But the currency which the private guys issued in the form of Bitcoin and some others has actually not caught up as currency, right? Please see, there is a difference between asset and currency. Every currency is possibly an asset, but assets are not necessarily currency. So today, a lot of assets, NFTs and other things which are getting created are pure assets. They're not currencies, right? Now, except the stable coins, which are working as in international payments as literally as currency, there is none of you who might have bought this have used it for making payment for buying any goods or services. So that's not the currency function. What the government has announced now is that, like your banknotes or the coins which we have been using as currency, the government or the RBI will now come up with a digital form of currency. So imagine the rupee note which you are using today, it's a paper one, if you have a digital rupee with you, and digital will definitely require you to have a digital wallet to receive and make payment in that form of the rupee, right? But like the rupee rupee note was different than the silver coin which was earlier used, the digital rupee is different from the paper rupee, but at the same time does the same function which the paper rupee does. So you can think of the RBI's digital currency or digital rupee as another form of the currency, official currency, which can be used in a digital network. But what exactly would be the format, design, way of the currency is still to come. And I think a lot of work would still need to be done before this becomes usable in the country.
Priyanshi, you can ask me next question.
How budget is allocated to different sectors?
This is too general a question. I try to respond. Government is a very complex and large organization. There are about 95 ministries and departments, right? And the system, as I tried to explain initially, the parliament requires the demand for grants to be presented to itself. So if, let us say, agriculture ministries require 1 lakh crore for different programs, so there is a demand for agriculture ministry. So those requirements are collected in the form of the agriculture ministry's demand and then taken to the parliament. And the process is very extensive and large. This starts months before the actual budget is presented. But if you have more specific question, like if you said something is bothering, that how is money allocated to, let us say, for PLI or anything, I would be in a position to argue more specifically.
Yes, sir. We actually wanted to know like how budget is allocated to different sectors, like the amount.
See, the process
On what
is
basis
we
the government
have
decides?
budget finalization committee. So once the proposals from different ministries are received, then there is a Department of Expenditure in the Ministry of Finance, and there is a Department of Economic Affairs in the Ministry of Finance. So Economic Affairs is formally in charge of the budget making, but the Department of Expenditure does the finalization of the expenditures. That committee which finalizes the expenditure is headed by the expenditure secretary. They would go through each and every proposal which comes from, let's say, something has come from the petroleum ministry, right? It wants some amount for the LPG subsidy, right? Now, so the budget finalization committee decides and sits with them and works out different ways to assess what might be the LPG subsidy requirement for next year. For example, suppose you expect the policy to be changed, that or whether you would provide subsidy or not, or you estimate that this is the likely gas prices next year, and this is likely to be increased from the consumers, and the gap would be this much. So all these exercises would have to be done very carefully and in detail. And at the end of the day, the petroleum ministry and the expenditure and the economic affairs sitting together will arrive at a kind of number. It may not be always possible to have a consensus. There may be a difference of opinion in what the demanding ministry wants and what the expenditure or the economic affairs is prepared to permit, right? In that case, the final view is taken by the finance ministry, but that is the way the allocations are finalized.
Okay, sir. So the next question is like, which according to you was the most ideal budget, financial budget?
It's again, you have to see it from which point. Some people see it from the taxation angle, right? So, which brought the taxation reforms, which reduced the applicable rates of taxation. Some people see it from the point of the economic reforms. From the economic reforms, almost everywhere that 1992 budget, which Manmohan Singh presented, and unleashed a lot of economic reforms in the country, is rated as one of the best budgets. Like from the taxation points, I think one of the budgets in 1996, when the individual tax rates were brought into or reorganized into 3 slabs, and the highest rate of taxation was reduced to 30%. That was, a lot of people call that as dream budget. Right. So I don't think there is any sort of evaluation or assessment or ranking of the budgets. But if you look at in last 30, 40 years, some of those major budgets which come into the mind, I think 2 stand out. There have been, from individual programs point of view, there have been many budgets, something started, something. But on the whole, if you look at it, I think these 2 would rate as something very, very major.
Okay, sir. So, sir, actually, for many of the participants have raised hands for the questions. So, like, if any of the participants want to ask question directly from the sir and have not filled the Google form, so anyone who want to raise their hand and want to ask the question.
Yeah, we can do another 5 minutes because we already at
Yes, sir.
7:30. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll make it quick. If anyone wants to ask the question, just Preet.
Preet Sethi has raised.
Okay, just wait 1 second. Now you can unmute yourself.
Anubhav, we have Director Sir also with us.
Hello, good evening everyone. Good evening, sir.
Yeah, good evening.
Sir, I'm very much into stock market, so I wanted to ask the question related to that. So, sir, the budget release this year, the markets didn't react as much as they reacted in 2021. So, sir, can you please comment on that?
See, stock market is not representative of the entire economy, right? Stock market typically represents the maximum 3,500 odd companies which are listed on the stock market. We have about 14 lakh companies besides 8 crore other enterprises working in the country. So first, please keep always in mind that the stock markets represents essentially, and if you go back to the Sensex or the Nifty, which represents only 30 or 50 stocks, though they command a very large proportion of the market capitalization. So it possibly sort of reflect what is going to be the impact on these 30, 50 or 3,000 companies at best. So it's limited in that sense. Then stock market or the budget is not the only event taking place around this time. There is a lot of changes in the global economy, the foreign flows, and many other things which impact. And therefore, I think it's quite wrong to say that budget would be sort of influencing in one-to-one, kind of that if your tax have been reduced by this, so budget the stock markets would raise by this. I think there's no metric for that. And this time, as we discussed earlier, there were no proposals relating to financial sector or the capital. So I think the first reaction of the stock market was essentially that they have been left untouched, and therefore this is a good thing to happen. So in first 2 days there was small uptick. Today there has been downfall. So my advice to you is not to look at too much of the budget impact on the stock markets.
Okay, Jaspreet, thank you. And anyone else who want to ask a question from sir? Anyone? We can have one question and then we'll be having our director, sir. So if anyone wants to ask.
Okay. Vasundhara.
Vasundhara we have. One second, Vasundhara. Vasundhara, please unmute yourself.
Good evening, sir.
Yeah, good evening.
Sir, my question is like, in this time, there is no tax relief to the middle person. In the cooperative house, they have given the tax relief to them, but not to the middle. But due to the pandemic, both have been hit hard. So what is your...
See, cooperatives, the relief is not very major. They were treated in terms of certain surcharges and taxation at a rate higher than the other companies and the assessees. So they have been brought at par. So there is no good reason to compare what has been done for the cooperatives to the individuals. Now, individual taxpayers were looking for some sort of relief on the tax slabs or tax rates, etc. And there is a very genuine need for sort of streamlining the tax slabs and the rates. We have raised in past 2-3 years lots of surcharges and cesses on the individuals' incomes. Last year, if you would remember, there was an option given that if you take some tax exemptions, you would be taxed at the higher rates. But if you don't take those tax exemptions, you would be taking lower rates. This has created confusion whether should I take it or not take it, what is more advantage, etc., etc. So there's been a certain kind of, so there were two expectations. One was lowering of the tax rate, and the second one was rationalization or streamlining of the tax structure in terms of rates and the slabs. None of those things happened. Maybe the finance minister decided that this is not the year to do any tinkering, further tinkering with it. Maybe she will deal with it next year.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for patiently answering all our questions and sharing your knowledge with us. Now, I would like to extend my gratitude to our director, sir, Professor Dr. Ravi Kumar Gupta, sir, and welcome him to say a few words.
जी, thank you, sir. गर्ग साहब, हाँ, मैं थोड़ा सा लेट ज्वाइन कर पाया, लेकिन मेरे लिए भी और हमारे इस इंस्टीट्यूशन के लिए महाराजा अग्रसेन इंस्टीट्यूट ऑफ मैनेजमेंट स्टडीज जो दिल्ली रोहिणी में है, मुझे उम्मीद है आपने शायद कभी विजिट किया हो या फिर कभी मिलना हो पाया हमारे इंस्टीट्यूट।
मैं नहीं आ पाया हूँ उधर, मैं दिल्ली में नहीं पढ़ा था।
हाँ जी, हाँ जी, हाँ जी।
So I come from राजस्थान, अजमेर।
जी 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 जी। तो ये इंस्टीट्यूशन हमारा एक ट्रस्ट जो ऑपरेट करता है, महाराजा अग्रसेन टेक्निकल एजुकेशन सोसाइटी, और पिछले 20 सालों से ये हमारा ये इंस्टीट्यूट भी है, एक इंजीनियरिंग कॉलेज भी है और एक यूनिवर्सिटी भी है महाराजा अग्रसेन जी के नाम से ही हिमाचल प्रदेश बद्दी में, और कुल मिलाकर 10,000 से ज्यादा स्टूडेंट्स एनरोल्ड हैं अलग अलग प्रोग्राम्स में, और तकरीबन 1,000 के करीब जो है टीचिंग और नॉन टीचिंग स्टाफ के तौर पे ये मतलब फैमिली जो है वो जुड़ी हुई हैं, और मतलब काफी हद तक जो हमारे इसके संस्थापक रहे हैं वो डॉक्टर नंदकिशोर गर्ग जी रहे हैं, MLA भी रहे हैं श्रीनगर से, दिल्ली से 3 बार, और खुद स्वयंसेवक भी रहे हैं, संघ के बीजेपी से भी जुड़े हुए हैं। लेकिन सही मायने में काफी कुछ शिक्षा के माध्यम से मतलब इन संस्थानों में शिक्षा के साथ साथ कहीं ना कहीं मतलब महाराजा अग्रसेन के जो भी मतलब एक कह सकते हैं ना उसका उनके आदर्श है या भारतीय संस्कृति सभ्यता के भी जो आदर्श हैं उसको भी डालने की कोशिश करते हैं, मतलब उनको भी काफी समावेश करने की कोशिश करते हैं। तो ये तो हमारे लिए फक्र की बात है, बड़ी ही खुशी की बात रही कि हमारे इस इंस्टीट्यूशन के और हमारे स्टूडेंट्स जो कॉम्पैक्ट हमारी सोसाइटी है, बहुत ही डायनेमिक सोसाइटी है सर, इसके जो इसके स्टूडेंट्स हैं, जो इसके मेंबर्स हैं, जो जुड़े हुए हैं सभी, और आप जैसे ही सभी विद्वानों को बुलाते रहते हैं समय पर इस तरह के प्रोग्राम करते रहते हैं, बहुत डायनेमिक हैं वो। तो उनकी छोटी सी रिक्वेस्ट पे आप आए और काफी अच्छा लगा सुन के। मैं थोड़ा सा लेट ज्वाइन कर पाया, इट्स माय मिसफॉर्च्यून। तो कभी दोबारा फिर आपसे भी निवेदन करेंगे कि कभी हम अपने संस्थान के लिए भी आपसे निवेदन करेंगे। और आज फिर भी जो आए हैं उसके लिए आपका हाथ जोड़कर बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद।
थैंक यू वेरी मच गुप्ता जी। मैं एक चीज आपके, चूंकि ये बड़ी क्यूरियोसिटी वाली ऑडियंस है,
जी 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 जी,
इंटरेस्टेड इन इकोनॉमिक डेवलपमेंट्स एंड ऑल,
जी,
I have recently written a book.
Okay.
It's called $10 trillion Dream.
Yes, I have gone, मतलब I have just seen that advertisement.
हाँ, तो अभी ये 28 तारीख तक डिलीवर होना शुरू होगी।
हाँ 28 से डिलीवर, ठीक है, ठीक है।
इस किताब में आपको बहुत अच्छा डिस्क्रिप्शन अबाउट द स्टेट ऑफ इंडियन इकोनॉमी,
ओके,
और जो पिछले 75 साल में देश ने पॉलिसी रिफॉर्म्स किए,
फाइन,
उसका बड़ा अच्छा डिस्क्रिप्शन आपको मिलेगा।
जी जी,
और
जी,
फिर उसके बाद इसके सेकंड पार्ट में
जी,
तो मैं सोचता हूँ कि देश को किस तरह के बोल्ड पॉलिसी रिफॉर्म्स चाहिए
जी 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 जी,
इस इकोनॉमी को बनाने के लिए, $10 ट्रिलियन की इकोनॉमी।
वेरी गुड।
तो अगर आप में लोगों में इंटरेस्ट है तो आप किताब देखिए।
बिल्कुल बिल्कुल बिल्कुल।
किसी स्टेज पे उस किताब पे एक चर्चा करना चाहेंगे, जैसे आज अभी बजट पे चर्चा की, आई वुड बी वेरी हैप्पी टू।
ये हमारे लिए मतलब हाईएस्ट प्लेजर होगा, मतलब हम बुक भी प्रोक्योर कर लेंगे। आई थिंक 28 तक बुक मिल पाएगी, 28 के बाद मिल पाएगी।
अभी प्री बुकिंग हो रही है अमेज़न।
हाँ वो मैंने देखा था, प्री बुकिंग हो रही है, पर डिलीवरी 28 के बाद ऐसा कुछ था।
दैट्स करेक्ट।
जी जी जी।
बट स्टूडेंट्स को मेरी सलाह है कि अगर आपको एक कहीं रेफरेंस के लिए देश की इकोनॉमी को पूरा समझना है तो you would find this very interesting and comprehensive. And we can have a discussion on this sometime in late March or April.
जी नहीं, बिल्कुल सर, ये हमारे लिए बहुत ही अच्छी बात रहेगी। मैं खुद भी एक्साइटेड हूँ इस बारे में पढ़ने के लिए। मैं खुद भी मैनेजमेंट स्टूडेंट रहा हूँ और मेरा फाइनेंस का ही एरिया है सर, कोर एरिया।
आपकी फैकल्टी के लिए भी विशेष तौर से, बिकॉज फैकल्टी ही टीच करती है।
जी बिल्कुल बिल्कुल,
लोगों तक वो ले जाती है। तो फैकल्टी विल आल्सो फाइंड वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग, एंड इफ द फैकल्टी आल्सो वांट्स टू हैव एन इंटरेक्शन विद और विदाउट स्टूडेंट्स, जी आई वुड बी हैप्पी टू डू।
बहुत अच्छा सर, बहुत अच्छा रहेगा। ये हमें दूसरा एक और मौका मिल गया अभी से ही आपसे जुड़ने का। आपका बेस कहाँ है सर, कहाँ पर रहते हैं आप? बेस आप अभी?
मैं यहाँ पे एक जगह है मुनीर का एनक्लेव।
हाँ हाँ हाँ,
ये नेल्सन मंडेला मार्ग पे है, वसंत विहार पुलिस स्टेशन के सामने ये कॉलोनी है।
जी सर, जी सर, जी सर।
तो हम लोग यहाँ पे जब मैंने सरकार छोड़ी 2019 के बाद,
जी जी जी,
तो अब अपना रहवास हम लोगों ने यहाँ।
अरे बहुत अच्छा जी, बहुत अच्छा। बहुत अच्छा। तो फिर तो आपसे मिला जा सकता है, जुड़ा भी जा सकता है। मैं जो भी स्टूडेंट्स आपसे संपर्क में रहे उनसे मैं आपका कांटेक्ट भी ले लूंगा मैं। और हमारे चेयरमैन साहब ने भी कुछ किताबें लिखी है, मैं उनका सेट आपको एक भेजूंगा।
राइट,
बहुत अच्छा लगेगा आपको। वो भी बड़े अच्छे लेखक भी हैं और मतलब काफी बहुत विद्वान है, मतलब वो भी, उन्होंने किताबें लिखी हैं। मैं वो एक सेट आपको जरूर शेयर करूंगा सर।
बिल्कुल, प्लेजर, शुक्रिया।
बहुत अच्छा। और इसी प्लेटफॉर्म पे मैं अपने फैकल्टी भी, जो डॉक्टर सुमेधा दत्ता हैं, डॉक्टर भारती चौधरी, डॉक्टर एकता डार्गन और स्टूडेंट्स, भाई मेरे पास सिर्फ 2 के ही नाम आए हुए हैं अभी तक, अनुभव और विदित, पर जो भी मुझे नाम दिखाई दे रहे हैं उन सब ने, जिन्होंने भी इस कार्यक्रम को करने के लिए, ऑर्गेनाइज करने के लिए जो कंट्रीब्यूशन किया है, और जो भी स्टूडेंट्स एंशियस रहे इसको अटेंड करने के लिए भी और क्यूरियोसिटी दिखाई। सवाल पूछना सर बहुत बड़ी बात होती है ना।
यस, दैट शोज। मैं तो एक्चुअली जज ये करता हूँ
जी जी,
कहाँ पे किस तरह के सवाल आते हैं। दैट टेल्स मी कि कितनी इंटेंसिटी है इंटरेस्ट की और कितनी क्यूरियोसिटी है, और उनका क्या बेस है जिससे वो सवाल निकलता है।
जी जी,
तो अगर बेस शेलो होता है तो पता लग जाता है सवाल भी शेलो।
बिल्कुल ठीक कहा, बिल्कुल ठीक कहा आपने। नहीं, हमारे पास बेहतरीन सभी स्टूडेंट्स हैं, और दिल्ली में मतलब आईपी यूनिवर्सिटी में चॉइस जो होती है यूनिवर्सिटी के बाद हमारे इस कॉलेज में एडमिशन लेने की रहती है। चलिए, इन सबका धन्यवाद भी है और मेरी शुभकामनाएं भी। और सर आपको पुनः बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद आपका।
थैंक यू वेरी मच, इट वाज अ प्लेजर टू बी विद यू।
माय ग्रेट प्लेजर,
ऑल द बेस्ट। थैंक यू। राइट,
थैंक यू। और सभी को बेस्ट विशेस, सभी स्टूडेंट्स को खास तौर पे।
Thank you so much, sir, for your kind words. On behalf of MAIMS and the entire Compact team, I would like to extend a very hearty vote of thanks to Mr. Subhash Chandra Garg sir for taking out valuable time from his busy schedule and joining us today. It was indeed a great session, sir, and I'm sure it has helped all of us comprehend the budget better. Now, I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude to our founder, Chairman Dr. Nan Kishore Garg sir, Director General Dr. S.K. Garg sir, Advisor, Mates, Dr. G.P. Govil sir, Director Mains, Dr. Ravi Kumar Gupta sir. I would also like to thank Dr. Vijay Kumar Khurana sir, HOD, Department of Business Administration, Dr. Vinita Gupta ma'am, HOD, Department of Journalism and Mass Communication, Dr. Manju Gupta ma'am, HOD, Department of Commerce, Dr. Praveen Kumar Gupta sir, HOD, Department of Law, Dr. Sanjay Kumar Mangla sir, HOD, Department of Economics, and all our other faculty members. I would also like to express my gratitude to our faculty coordinators, Bharti ma'am and Ekta ma'am, for guiding us through each stage. I would also like to thank Team Compact for the great efforts. Lastly, I would also like to thank the audience for being patient listeners and for making this an interactive session. It doesn't matter how much we hate endings, it is inevitable indeed. But we all must remember, ending take us one step closer to New Year beginning. Compact will be back with yet another engaging and informative event for you all. Do join our WhatsApp group to keep yourself updated with the upcoming events. Link will be there in the chat box. Till then, stay safe, stay connected, and thank you so much.
Thank you to you all for organizing this. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks to all.
Thank you everyone for those who have joined us for this session. Also those who are on the YouTube and on the Google Meet, thank you for coming up for this session, and the session has concluded officially. Thank you. You all can leave now.